Right, so here we're looking at how to convert fractions to decimals to percentages, because each of those is just a way of representing a number, which means we can convert between them and it will mean exactly the same thing. Now, there are some important conversions that you are expected to just remember. For example, you're expected to remember that a half is the same as 0.5, which is the same as 50%. And there's a little table there just to remind you which are the key conversions you are supposed to just know without having to work them out. I'll just say these decimal, with 1/3, you'd normally write this 0.3333 as just 0.3 with a dot above it that means recurring. And you'd write the percentage as 33.3 with a dot above it to mean it's recurring. You'd normally write them that way, but they do mean the same thing. But what about the more complicated ones, the ones that you aren't expected to just remember? Well, you can convert between them, and I'm going to explain it a bit like this. So let's start with the least complicated ones. To turn a decimal into a percentage, so to turn something like 0.3 into a percentage, you just multiply it by 100. So 0.3 multiplied by 100 is 30%, which means you do exactly the same thing to go in the other direction. Sorry, not the same thing. You do the opposite to go in the other direction. So instead of timesing by 100, we would divide by 100. And if we take 30 and divide it by 100, we get 0.3, which is what 30% is as a decimal. To turn a fraction into a decimal, either it'll be a fraction that's quite common, like the ones that we said you are expected to remember, or if it's more complicated, you would take the top of the fraction and divide it by the bottom of the fraction. For example, if I wanted to turn, what should we do? 4/5. Let's just do 4/5. If I want to turn 4/5 into a decimal, on the calculator, if we do 4 divided by 5, it gives us 0.8, which is what it is as a decimal. And then the last one, sort of the last one, is to go from a percentage to a fraction. So if I start with something like 15%, well, don't forget percentage means out of 100 per cent. It means out of 100. So that 15% is 15 out of 100. And sometimes you'll be able to simplify that fraction, and sometimes you'll have to simplify that fraction. So we could notice with this example that 15 out of 100, we can divide them both by 5 to get 3 out of 20. And that's as simple as it goes. That's simplified. So to turn a percentage into a fraction, you write the percentage out of 100, and then it's a fraction. You may just then need to manipulate it a bit afterwards by simplifying or doing something else. So, percentage to fraction, you write it out of 100 and simplify. To go from a fraction to a decimal, you might be able to recognize it from our list of key ones to remember, but if not, if it's on a calculator, you can do the top of the fraction divided by the bottom of the fraction. Then to go from a decimal to a percentage, you can multiply by 100, and to go from percentage to decimal, you divide by 100. Now, if you wanted to go from a fraction back to a percentage, there is a way of doing it, but it might just be easier to turn the fraction into a decimal and then turn that into a percentage. It's fine to go around the wheel if you need to. The same if you need to turn a decimal into a fraction. It might just be easier to turn the decimal into a percentage by timesing by 100, and then turn the percentage into a fraction by writing it out of 100. So what I'm going to do is put some questions there. I've got a question there that says complete this table. So you've got to convert the fraction to a percentage in the first one and just fill in the blanks, but ignore the black squares. If you like, you can pause here and have a little go at that, or alternatively, you can just leave the video playing as I talk through. So turning 3/4 into a percentage. Well, two different ways we could do it, I suppose. We could just recognize that 3/4 is a lot like 1/4, just that there's 3 of them. And if 1/4 is 25%, then 3 of them is 25, 50, 75%. Alternatively, if we were a bit stuck, you could do 3 divided by 4, which is halving it and halving it again, which is 0.75, which, when you times by 100, is 75%. Next, we have this 23%, which we want as a decimal. And to turn a percentage to a decimal, we divide it by 100. And 23 divided by 100 is 0.23. Then we have 0.12, which we want as both a fraction and a percentage. But since we're starting with a decimal, let's just turn it into a percentage by following this arrow, and then turn that into a fraction, and we'll have done it. So to turn it to a percentage, we take 0.12 and we multiply by 100, which gives us 12%. To then turn that into a fraction, we just write it out of 100, which is 12 over 100. And if you gave that as your answer, it's fine, because this table hasn't asked us to simplify, but that fraction does simplify because they're both even. So if we half them both, we can get 6 out of 50. And in fact, they're still even, so we can half them again to get 3 out of 25. Let me just, space that out a bit and just looked at that, and that's quite cramped. So we halved it first to get 6 out of 50, and then halved it again to get 3 out of 25. We then have a fraction that we need as a decimal and a percentage. We'll start by turning it into a decimal by doing the top divided by the bottom. And 3, the top, divided by 10 is 0.3. So there's the decimal. And we can then multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percentage, which is 30%. And then finally, we have a percentage, which we want as both a decimal and as a fraction. To turn the percentage to a decimal, we are dividing by 100, so that's 0.45. And to turn the percentage to a fraction, we just write it out of 100, which is 45 out of 100. And again, that is that percentage as a fraction. However, sometimes you're asked to simplify, so we'll do that as well. We can divide the top and bottom by 5, which would give us 9 out of 20. And that's it. So that's converting between fractions, decimals, and percentages. It can be quite complicated. There are some that you need to remember, but there is also a method for working it out if you do forget. That's fractions, decimals, percentages. Hope that helps.